Nottingham Forest come home to the City Ground for a first leg tie against French side Lyon. Britain's only contenders left in the UEFA Cup must contain the team that beat Lazio in the last round. Flying the flag in the UEFA Cup, Nottingham Forest versus Lyon in Sports Night tomorrow at 8 on BBC One.
In the summer of this year, the church was rocked by scandal. The man at the centre now responds to those allegations.
He seemed to want to have as many women as he possibly could get his hands on.
I'd committed myself to what I thought was right and just.
We were taken in. We were suckers.
I've been accused, sentenced, hung.
I mean, we really felt here was something good.
All these people are saying that I betrayed them.
The New Age priest accused of bringing the Church of England into disrepute speaks publicly for the first time. Everyman, Sunday at 10:10, followed by the debate in Heart of the Matter on BBC One.
Agents Mulder and Scully make a terrifying journey into the mind of a murderer on BBC Two now in The X-Files. This is BBC One. Now a party political broadcast by the Labour Party.
Something's happening to this country. It's happening in your neighbourhood, in your street, in your home, to your family. It's affecting each and every one of us in our daily lives. There's no mistaking it. Since the Conservatives came to power in 1979, this country's been sliding. Because the Conservatives go on as if a good school should be just for the few, our children's education is sliding. Out of the industrialised countries, only Turkey has fewer 18-year-olds studying full-time than we do. Because the Conservatives have spent our money on the wrong things, our health service is sliding. Last year alone, over 50,000 people had their operation cancelled on the day of their admission. Because the Conservatives run the economy for short-term political ends, our economy is sliding. We've sunk to an all-time low of 18th out of the world's richest industrial countries, which is a full 5 places lower than our position in 1979. Because the Conservatives privatise at all costs, our transport is sliding. Last year, there was no new investment in rolling stock, and services are worse than ever. The Tories have got us into this mess, and now they're getting us to pay for their mistakes by imposing the biggest tax rise ever in the form of 21 new taxes. We're now paying 7p more in the pound than we were in 1992. For the average family, that means an extra £800 a year. And where have they spent the money from these increased taxes? There are now 50% more bureaucrats in the NHS. It's gone on propping them up. Too many people are out of work, 500,000 for more than 2 years. £20 billion a year of it has gone on supporting them. Since the privatisation of the utilities, their boardroom pay's increased by £30 million, plus there's another 120 million they'll get in share option profits. It's gone on propping them up as well. With Tory policies like these, it's no wonder the country's sliding further and further to the point where it won't be long before... So what would Labour do? We'd get the economy going again. by providing stability, tackling job insecurity, encouraging higher savings and working with business to encourage investment. And we stand for fair tax. When affordable, we'd like to cut VAT on fuel to 5% and the starting rate of tax for every ordinary family. We'd also bring in a tax on the excess profits of privatised utilities, using the money to help put the unemployed back to work. We'd raise the standards in education, aiming to provide a nursery place for every 3- and 4-year-old and cut class sizes for infants. We'd stop rail privatisation, using a public-private partnership to modernise our entire transport network. And we'd cut down on wasteful, unnecessary bureaucracy in the NHS. Together, we can stop the country sliding. Help us to do it now by joining the Labour Party. Just phone 0990 300 900. That's 0990 300 900. Or write to the Labour Party, Free Post, London, SE17 1BR.
That party political broadcast by the Labour Party can be seen again with subtitles on BBC Two at 10:30.
The fairy tale princess, now caught in the glare of a national debate. Many claim to speak for her. Now, for the first time, she speaks for herself. A Panorama special, tonight, 9:40 on BBC One.
First on BBC One, the main evening news with Michael Burke at 9:05.
The Americans have stopped the clock in their efforts to secure a peace deal in Bosnia. President Clinton still standing by after deadlines that came and went, and still the talks go on. The Princess of Wales out on the town this evening as critics say tonight's television interview will destroy her right to privacy. And the jury in the Rosemary West trial is spending the night in a hotel. They'll consider their verdicts again tomorrow. Good evening. All day, an agreement to end the war in the Balkans that has killed 250,000 people and made 2 million more homeless has seemed tantalisingly close. There'd been growing optimism that talks between the warring factions at an airbase in Dayton, Ohio, would end in a peace deal today. But two deadlines set by the Americans passed without an announcement. There's been talk of new snags, and US officials say the talks are continuing on an hour-by-hour basis. Diplomatic correspondent Brian Hanrahan is in Dayton.
Well, there's no peace agreement yet, and there's not much evidence of any progress towards one today. That's effectively the summary of what's happened today, offered by American officials. Operating under an American threat to shut down the negotiations, the delegates talked for 22.5 out of the last 24 hours. But when they adjourned at 5:30 this morning, they still hadn't yet reached an agreement. The United States had made all the preparations to end the talks at 10 o'clock this morning, 3 o'clock London time. The television pantechnicons were assembled outside the conference centre, where the negotiations had continued through until the early hours of the morning, with US officials insisting the deadline was real. The talks would end in either success or failure. But the deadline came and went without an agreement and without a breakdown. No new timetable has been set. The wait continues. After a day and a night of non-stop talking, President Izetbegovic went for a walk with his Prime Minister. All the delegations were taking stock. But by facing down an American ultimatum, the participants have effectively reduced America's influence over the negotiations. US officials have been defending their tactics. They say since the talks began 20 days ago, they have made substantial progress, and it would be wrong to break them up now for want of a few extra hours. But the participants have proved exceptionally stubborn and uncompromising over the final division of territory. The delegations are now back in separate rooms in the conference centre, trying to work out what to do next. US officials say they'll take events hour by hour in deciding whether there's any point continuing the negotiations. The American delegation could still try to exploit President Clinton's influence. Until now, he's been preoccupied with a budget crisis in Washington, but may be reluctant to squander further political capital on Balkan intransigence. But here in Dayton, something is needed to break the stalemate. American officials say they're still trying to get a comprehensive peace agreement covering everything. And as long as there are outstanding issues, no matter how small they are, they still won't have succeeded. Mike?
What's your sense of this, Brian? Do you think this so-called best chance for peace is actually slipping away tonight?
It does seem as though it's got into one of those Balkan stalemates in which you can't shift the parties from what they regard as being the absolute minimum they're prepared to go to. I think you have to ask just how serious the intent will now be to compromise, and I just don't think there appears to be a mood to compromise.
But how come, if there had been so much progress earlier on, that the talk should appear to be foundering over what are, in effect, tiny fragments of land?
Well, we don't know exactly what they are. The Americans say there's a kind of, how they put it, ebb and flow quality. 2 steps forward, 1 back. There appear to be more steps backwards going on at the moment than forwards. And I think one of the things you have to ask is whether it's the actual issue of one bit of land or another, or is it the principle? Are there some people in those negotiations who really don't want them to succeed, but they've been dragged along by the Americans, and now they come to the final point, they actually dig their heels in over something which we would regard as quite trivial, but they say, no, we can't give in the hope that it will actually deadlock the entire negotiation.
Brian, very briefly, if you would, if it does break down at the final moment, where does that leave us?
In chaos, I think, because almost everything that's been going on has been predicated on the idea that there would be an end. There would be some kind of deal. There would be some replacement of the United Nations. There would be something to deal with the arms embargo, the position of the Muslims. If this actually comes to a halt, then we go into another winter and possibly another spring with everything unresolved and lots of vulnerable Western soldiers there.
Brian, thanks very much. Here, the press advisor to the Princess of Wales has confirmed that he's to leave his job. It follows the Princess's decision to give an interview to the BBC's Panorama without telling him or Buckingham Palace. The programme, to be shown tonight, has renewed arguments about the royal family's right to privacy.
Looking unconcerned by the storm of controversy engulfing her, the Princess arrived for a fashion show and charity gala in London tonight, as an estimated 15 million people prepare to scrutinise her every word on television. Even before the programme is screened, it has cost her the services of her press secretary, Jeff Crawford. After 3 years at her side, he feels his position is now untenable because he was neither consulted nor told about the interview in advance. The Queen, who also knew nothing about it, will have to wait until later to find out what her daughter-in-law has to say. She and the Duke of Edinburgh are at the Royal Variety Show tonight. But for scores of news teams, it's the performance of the Princess that is paramount. Her decision to record the interview is guaranteed that her every move is watched, but she has pointedly refused to change her routine, turning up as usual this morning for her daily workout.
She's put her life, her private life, into the public domain. And she can't possibly go up to photographers and say, don't photograph me because this is a private matter, because she's in the public eye. She's put herself there very firmly, and she knows it. And I think that this is the one price she's going to have to pay for this hour of, shall we say, bearing her soul.
This morning, the Sun newspaper published pictures of the Princess visiting Prince William at Eton yesterday. That would seem to fly in the face of the warning when he started there that he must be allowed the same privacy as other schoolboys. Over the weekend, the chairman of the Press Complaints Commission, Lord Wakeham, made it clear that by giving the interview, the Princess could be putting herself beyond the PCC's protection. But a former chairman says no one can adjudicate on any claim in advance.
She's got an absolute right to do what she likes, as long as it's within the law, and clearly is. And if she wants to publicise her private affairs, that's a matter for her. Whether that, of course, does in fact disentitle her to any future claim for invasion of privacy must be very much an open question.
The Princess can look to her brother for a precedent. He complained to the Commission over newspaper pictures of his wife in a clinic. The papers argued that he had put his private life into the public domain by talking to Hello magazine. But the PCC ruled against them, saying the fact that Earl Spencer may have sought publicity in the past cannot reasonably be taken to mean that henceforward every aspect of the private affairs of his wife is a matter which the press has a right to put into the public domain. The response of Prince Charles to the interview will be pivotal. He was at a lunch at Buckingham Palace today and is said to view his wife's decision to speak out with disappointment and weariness, but not anger. Jenny Bond, BBC News.
In his annual speech at London's Guildhall tonight, the Prime Minister will hint at tax cuts in the budget. He'll tell city business leaders that low taxes encourage enterprise. In the speech, Mr Major attacks plans for Europe's single currency and says important questions about the currency are still unanswered.
Coming to speak at the Lord Mayor's banquet offers the Prime Minister an annual showcase for key themes. 2 years ago, he astounded the political world by putting Northern Ireland at the top of his agenda. Last year, he tackled sleaze, warning the Commons mustn't become a hiring fair. Tonight, after the handshakes and the ceremonial, he'll be spelling out his belief that Britain can be the enterprise centre of Europe, and warning of the dangers if Europe and Britain allow themselves to become uncompetitive. America and Japan, he warns, spend and tax less. So, stoking up expectations of tax cuts in next week's budget, he will insist there must be a limit to the share of national income governments spend, and a limit to what they take in tax. The less we take in tax, the more we can encourage enterprise. The government's aim, he will tell his fellow diners, is to get public spending below 40% of national income. Mr Major's keen to warn Europe it must compete with the Far East. But with an election approaching and Labour making inroads into the traditionally Tory business vote, he's keen too to underline political differences with an opposition pledged to take Britain into the social chapter. On that, he argues, there is no national veto allowing member governments to pick and mix. If others in Europe bind themselves into uncompetitive economic and social structures, Britain will not join them. We are not going to put our economic success at risk. But the big question he poses for his audience tonight, and for the European leaders he'll meet at another summit shortly, is how Europe will cope with its divisions if some member countries go ahead with the controversial single European currency and others don't. How would Europe's institutions serve the interests of those countries which adopted the single currency and those that didn't? What would it mean for the single market? Those are the issues that must be answered before a single currency goes ahead. Some members of the Cabinet would like the Prime Minister to close off altogether the option of Britain joining a single European currency. Others want it ruled out at least for the lifetime of the next Parliament. He's not prepared to do either yet, but Mr Major is making increasingly clear his doubts about whether a single European currency will ever become a practical working reality. Robin Oakley, BBC News, the Guildhall.
The jury in the Rosemary West trial has been sent to a hotel for the night. The jurors, 7 men and 4 women, began considering their verdict at midday. The judge told them not to rush their decision. Mrs West denies 10 charges of murdering young women and girls.
Rosemary West set off this morning from the prison where she's been held throughout her trial, knowing she would soon face the judgment of her peers. But first, Mr Justice Mantell, seen here arriving at court today, had to complete summing up the case for the jury. He reminded them that Rosemary West had never made any admission in relation to any of the murder charges. She'd said the first she'd known that anyone had died an unnatural death was when Heather West's body was discovered. Mr Justice Mantell told the jury they had to treat Mrs West's evidence in the same way as that of other witnesses. Remember the impression that she made upon you at the time, he said. You have to assess her truthfulness amongst everything else. Mr Justice Mantell reminded the jury that they'd been told defendants might lie for a number of innocent reasons, out of panic or confusion, or to conceal disreputable conduct. But he told the jury, if you're sure Rosemary West lied for some other reason, out of consciousness of guilt, or to deflect inquiries or mislead investigations, then the fact that a lie has been told may be evidence going to prove guilt or support the prosecution case. Before sending the jury out at 11:45, Mr Justice Mantell told them not to hurry. It would take them a little time to read the documents they would be taking into the jury room. Just before 4:30, the judge told the jury that they'd worked hard enough for one day and they were taken by coach to a hotel for the night. They'll return to court tomorrow morning. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News, Winchester.
The former Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa has conceded defeat in Poland's presidential election. Final results gave victory to Aleksander Kwaśniewski, once a communist minister, who won by just 3%. Mr Wałęsa said the close result showed that the spirit of the Solidarity Union had not been forgotten.
The end of a chapter in Polish and European history. Tonight, Lech Wałęsa made a brief statement conceding defeat, but in so doing vowed to stay in politics and fight the former communists. The solidarity spirit, he said, was still alive in Poland. But the results had shown that large numbers of former Solidarity supporters had deserted their one-time hero, turned off by economic hardship during his presidency and by his erratic and at times arrogant performance as head of state. For the new president and his supporters, victory had begun to seem possible in the early hours of this morning. The party now controls all positions of political power in Poland. Alexander Kwaśniewski, who tonight appeared briefly to acknowledge his success, was a minister in the last communist government, and most of those around him now have a similar background. But no one seriously suggests he wants to reverse the changes of the last 6 years. During the campaign, he appeared a sincere and committed advocate of privatization and the market economy. The election has, though, left the country deeply divided, and half the population will want to see proof that, in office, President Kwaśniewski keeps his promises. The Wałęsa era began in 1980, when, as a shipyard electrician in Gdansk, he mobilized mass support for a stand against the communist dictatorship. His political skills shone through when he successfully offered an end to mass strikes in return for the landmark recognition of Solidarity as the first independent trade union in the Eastern Bloc. Even after a year of martial law and the internment of Wałęsa, Solidarity remained a cohesive and strong political force, which went on to become the vehicle for peaceful revolution and sweep to power in the first parliamentary elections in 1989. Wałęsa's reward came a year later, when he was elected in the first post-communist election for president. But the honeymoon period was short. President Wałęsa began to lose his political touch, and the electoral trend began that ended in his defeat tonight. Steve McCormack, BBC News, Warsaw.
Here, a 19-year-old man has appeared before magistrates at Nuneaton in Warwickshire, charged with the murder of the teenager Naomi Smith. Naomi's body was found in a playground close to her home in Annesley Common, near Nuneaton, in September. Edwin Hopkins of Annesley Common was remanded in custody for a week. Yorkshire Water has delayed proposed 24-hour cuts in supplies to customers in Halifax and Huddersfield. The company said moderate rainfall over the weekend and the decision to bring in water from the northeast meant there wouldn't be cuts before January. 6,500 Vauxhall car workers have voted by a majority of 4-1 in favour of industrial action over pay. They've been offered an increase worth 3.5%. Vauxhall insists it's a generous offer. Sweeping changes to Britain's immigration rules have been presented by the Home Secretary, Michael Howard. He told MPs there was no question of racism in his proposals, but Britain had become too attractive a destination for bogus asylum seekers. Labour has again called for the bill to be referred to a special Commons committee.
According to government figures, more than 4,000 asylum seekers like these arrive in Britain every month. The Home Office says only 4 out of every 100 turn out to be genuine, and only 4% have their appeals upheld. The proposals set out today include threatening employers with criminal charges if they employ illegal immigrants, speeding up the appeals procedure, and drawing up a so-called white list of countries where people aren't considered to be at risk. Using a prime-time Commons statement to announce the proposals before the bill's publication, the Home Secretary denied it was racist and said it was the fairest way to tackle abuse of the system.
Much has been said about the desirability of taking this issue out of party politics. I agree with that view. There is one very simple way in which that can be achieved. These measures represent a balanced response to a clear and serious problem. They deserve support on both sides of this House.
Labour insists there's only one way to ensure fairness, with a special committee, a view backed by a number of left-wing Tories.
If the Secretary of State now accepts that this is an issue which should be taken out of party politics, then surely it should be the subject of cool examination by a special standing committee of this House, with the intention of removing the controversy about this measure.
Refugee support groups fear the new rules will increase the danger of genuine applicants being turned away.
I don't think anybody in their right mind would claim that somebody who's been tortured is a bogus asylum seeker, but that's what the government would have us believe. And any procedures which speeded up that process, anything which made it more difficult for a person to put their claim for asylum, would make things still worse.
Employers are to be consulted on the measures involving them. Some say they're relieved they'll be spared prosecution if they can prove they've checked the national insurance numbers of all employees.
From what the Home Secretary has said today, we do think they've gone for the minimum requirement, asking for a national insurance number, and that may not in itself be unreasonable.
One Conservative former minister said this evening that the bill actually didn't go very far at all. The fact that it tinkered on the edges proved that its sole intention was to test out Labour's voting intentions and accused them of being soft on bogus asylum seekers. That's a charge Labour denies, though they're holding back on saying how they'll vote on the bill until it's published in full in a fortnight's time. Carolyn Quinn, BBC News, Westminster.
The Metropolitan Police Commissioner has apologised to the Conservative Party chairman, Dr Brian Mahwini, for a delay in responding to a 999 call reporting a paint attack on him. Sir Paul Condon said the 18-minute police delay was due to human error.
That the police have had to make a full and public apology has come as no surprise. When the chairman of the Conservative Party was attacked with flour, paint and abuse last week, it took police nearly 20 minutes to respond. This on the day of the Queen's speech, when security at Westminster was supposedly at its highest. The police inquiry found that the calls for help being made by Dr Mahwini's aide, Alan Duncan, were initially handled in Newcastle because they were made on a mobile phone. As Mr Duncan made his citizen's arrest, Scotland Yard then put his call through to a special operations centre rather than treating it as a normal 999. Britain's top police officer said that was a crucial mistake.
In relation to the disgraceful incident involving Dr Mahwini, this was one where human error let us down.
And Sir Paul Condon told the Commons Public Accounts Committee the officer in charge of arrangements had apologised by letter both to Dr Mahwini and Alan Duncan.
The officer in charge of the arrangements on the day has personally apologised through a letter to Dr Mahwini and to Mr Duncan for the delay in dealing with this incident. But it brought home to all of us, sir, that every one of those 1.5 million emergency calls is potential drama and danger for those who are involved in them.
But many MPs have repeated again tonight that the whole question of security on this Westminster Green, with its public access on major occasions, does need to be looked at most urgently. Matthew Emreliwala, BBC News, Westminster.
The man who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin has told a court that justice had finally been done when he shot the Israeli Prime Minister. Yigal Amir was questioned by reporters before a court appearance in Tel Aviv. He admitted he'd made several other attempts to murder the late Prime Minister.
Yigal Amir was led into court looking as calm as ever and in a mood to talk. People say I'm an extremist, he said, but I'm just a citizen like anyone else. I never did anything illegal until I discovered the truth about the state. He was asked if he'd felt any remorse when on Thursday he was taken back to the scene of the assassination to show police how he killed the Prime Minister. The place reminded me of memorials to victims of peace, he said, meaning people killed by Palestinian terrorists. Justice has been done. Perhaps physically I acted alone, but the entire nation helped me pull the trigger. At the back of the courtroom, his family couldn't see or hear what was happening because of the crush of reporters and camera crews. Outside, armed police guarded the door. The assassin is now a target. The police insist that Yigal Amir was part of a right-wing conspiracy, but it's now alleged that the leader of his group was a government informer.
The allegations surrounding the case against Yigal Amir go to the very center of Israeli government and Israeli society. Mr. Rabin's assassination is dividing this country just as much as his policies did while he was alive.
Yigal Amir's parents have condemned the assassination. The question now is what the security services knew of his plans and when did they know it? Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
Hundreds of thousands of American government employees went back to work today after President Clinton finally reached agreement with Congress over the federal budget. The two sides had been locked in a bitter dispute which had paralysed the government for nearly a week. President Clinton says he'll balance the books within 7 years in return for a pledge that welfare programmes will be protected.
They're back to work and not before time. The government shutdown was set to become serious this week, affecting payments for prisons and hospitals and costing £80 million a day.
I'm glad the Childish Act is over. Now they need to get down to real business and get the country back to where it needs to be.
We're going to say great. The Republicans in Congress claimed an historic victory, committing the Clinton administration to help balance the budget in 7 years and use their preferred set of economic projections to get there. Key figures which will determine in billions of dollars how much the government has to spend.
I think we won. We didn't blink. We have a 7-year balanced budget using CBO estimates. But that may not be important. The important thing is we do what we should do, working together.
President Clinton, in turn, claimed he'd got what he wanted, protection for health care, education and the environment, and some input on the economic forecasts, in a deal which leaves plenty of room for maneuver.
We ought to be able to find common ground, and we ought to be able to do it and permit the day-to-day work of the United States and the American people to go forward. So, from my point of view, this is a very good thing and a good and somewhat unexpected development.
But this interim agreement is just a temporary truce, and the battle so far, bitter as it's been, a simple prelude to the arguing which starts now over what to cut and where in the effort to balance the books. Already another deadline is looming, December the 15th, before the money runs out again, and the wheels of government could grind to a halt once more. Bill Turnbull, BBC News, Washington.
Britain's latest nuclear submarines are being equipped for a new role, deep-sea rescue. The Navy's Trident submarines will be fitted with a mini-submarine that can be launched in emergencies. It's just successfully completed trials off the west coast of Scotland.
HMS Victorious, with its 16 nuclear-armed missiles, is one of the world's most lethal weapons. But here it's practicing the role of rescuer, acting as mothership for the American DSRV, Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle, a mini-sub that can recover sailors from sunken submarines thousands of feet below the surface. If a submarine does go down, there's usually little hope of survival. But DSRV is part of an increasingly international rescue effort that applies to most nations' submariners, and in Europe it starts with the much smaller British LR5 mini-sub. Operating from special ships, the civilian-manned LR5 is on 12 hours' notice to move. Here, during the latest trials, it's taking passengers to HMS Victorious, 100 metres below the surface off the Scottish coast.
You got it. Yes. We're here, people. We're here.
Finding a submarine in the murky waters of the Clyde isn't easy, especially if far below a desperate crew was running out of air and time.
Mossad, this is Lima 5. We have a hard seal. Monitoring the seal. Over.
It's a specialised business and dreadfully slow, but these trials mean that practice can make perfect. After the LR5, the DSRV looks positively spacious and is able to rescue 5 times as many people, which for Victorious, with its crew of 140, is something of a relief.
We do need a backup system. I mean, the submarine itself, there's a lot of secondary systems that we can use and we feel fairly safe, but it's always good to know that if something did go wrong, we'd be able to get off.
Surfacing now. The crew can now also use the mini-sub to rescue others by submarine-to-submarine transfer. Any nation with a standard escape hatch can be helped, even the Russians. Recent enmities are falling away before the need to defeat the eternal perils of the deep. Mark Leahy, BBC News on HMS Victorious.
The Beatles are back with the release of a new single, Free as a Bird. It's the first song to be produced by the group since they split up 25 years ago. The 3 surviving members of the band added their voices to a recording made by John Lennon in 1977.
A photo opportunity in the early hours of this morning, which borrowed shamelessly from the best of the Beatles' past. The much-hyped new single was released by the Abbey Road studios and delivered to radio stations.
Here it is, the first song in 25 years from the Beatles, Free as a Bird.
It was written by John Lennon and put together as a demo tape in 1977, 3 years before he was murdered. The unfinished recording was handed over to the remaining Beatles, Paul, George and Ringo, who produced this version. They couldn't make it to an international news conference held to launch the new single. Others, undeterred by one commentator who described it as a bit of a dirge, were there to promote it.
This will make it to number one, I'm confident. And I think it's much better than other number ones we've had. So I think it's between the two. You know, I think it's not the greatest they've ever done, but it's certainly a very, very good record indeed.
Away from the hype, music critics have been assessing the single's worth.
The thing is, everyone wants it to be another Hey Jude, they want it to be Sgt. Pepper, and it's not. And in 1977, John wasn't writing great stuff anyway, particularly.
It's had a mixed reception in the Fab Four's hometown.
It was a little out of date, a little over the top. Nothing like the Beatles.
I wasn't that impressed. I'm not a big fan of the Beatles in general, to be honest, but I don't know, it was all right. It was all right. People will probably buy it anyway, won't they, though? So.
It's catchy. It's like the old style, isn't it? Again, back again. It's good.
This unassuming Liverpool terraced house is said to have unquestionable historic interest. The National Trust has just bought it because it used to be Paul McCartney's home. It's meant a trip down memory lane for his brother Mike. Many of the group's early work was written here. The new single, Free as a Bird, may not be a Beatles classic, nor is it likely to introduce a new generation to Beatlemania. But it'll probably sell millions, make millions, and become a Christmas #1. Peter Hunt, BBC News.
The main news again tonight. Talks are continuing in Dayton, Ohio, to try to reach an agreement in the Bosnian peace talks. Newsnight on BBC 2 at 10:35 will discuss the implications of tonight's Panorama interview with the Princess of Wales. But from the 9 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening. The main stories from Look North tonight. More than 500,000 homes in West Yorkshire have been spared the threat of losing their water supplies, at least until the new year. The biggest transport operation ever seen in the region has helped avert the need for rota cuts.
Drastic measures for drastic times. 1,000 tankers a day are bringing water from Long Newton Reservoir near Darlington and from supplies in York to Eckup Reservoir in Leeds. This operation, costing £2 million a week, has helped Yorkshire Water postpone rationing.
Rota cuts will not be needed until January, early January at the absolute earliest. This is because we've had significant rainfall in the last week. The tankering operation that we're mounting right across Yorkshire is now becoming more and more effective and delivering more and more water, and our customers are continuing to hold down demand.
There's been 2 inches of rainfall in the last 10 days. Double that quantity, combined with this operation, could allow Yorkshire Water to put off rota cuts completely. Such an announcement could come within days.
Meanwhile, Yorkshire Water faced further criticism today over plans to take more water from the region's rivers. It wants to cut off flows to rivers from 22 reservoirs to tributaries of the River Calder. Conservationists say that would be disastrous.
The River Ryburn near Sowerby Bridge was one of the cleanest in the region, but recently supplies from Yorkshire Water reservoirs have been cut by 1/3, and surveys of insect life have confirmed damage has already been done. Now the company wants to cut off supplies from reservoirs altogether.
What this order will be doing is saying that they want to cut that off to save the water in the reservoir. And of course, if that's cut off, then many of these rivers will dry up completely.
Yorkshire Water says it needs the extra water to keep up public supplies, but critics say it could get the water from elsewhere, and the environment is being made to suffer to cut costs.
The bitter feud at Lincoln Cathedral has deepened after a former verger revealed that she's taking the dean and chapter to an industrial tribunal amid allegations of sexual harassment. Earlier this year, a church court cleared the dean of charges of sexual misconduct.
Dean Brandon Jackson was cleared of conduct unbecoming holy orders at a consistory court hearing earlier this year. A former verger at the cathedral, Verity Freestone, had claimed they'd had sex. Now, 5 months later, Miss Freestone is taking her former employers to an industrial tribunal. claiming sexual harassment.
I'm sure that she feels that it is the right thing to do. She alleges that sexual harassment took place at the workplace, that is to say at the cathedral, and she has certain rights which she can pursue in respect of that.
Although he's saying nothing publicly, the Dean has let it be known he doesn't intend to resign, despite mounting opposition from other clerics at the cathedral.
That's it. We'll be back in Breakfast News tomorrow morning at 6:25. In a moment, the national weather forecast with Rob McKelwey. From me, a very good night.
Good evening. It's been thundering with rain in the mountains of Mourne for the last hour or so. It's prompted a warning for Northern Ireland. This rain will continue as heavy and possibly thundery rain, with gusts of wind up to maybe over 50 miles an hour, so it's bound to be some local flooding. The line of thunderstorms stretches just from Belfast Lough down towards the southwest of Ireland, a definite line. In fact, you'd think it was a cold front, and it quite possibly is. You can see the rain itself, lighter colours, greens and yellows, heavy rain, slow to move, hence the warning. Slightly closer, the heaviest has just gone east of Larne, but it's still hanging back through the mountains of Mourne towards Drogheda in the Irish Republic. Now, ahead of it, during the day, we've had plenty of bands of rain across Britain, and there's a good deal of cloud, so it's not going to be a cold night. Indeed, pressure is low, and that's the thing that features on the map for probably the rest of the week. Things are slow to move eastwards, though. That front may not actually clear to the eastern side of the country by dusk tomorrow, so expect a pretty dull day. Not necessarily cold, though. The winds are already in the south, quite strong, touching gale force, but they will swing round to the west as the rain stops. And as you can see, it's a slow process, because that's tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. So no problems with frost. Double figures for many in the west and the north tonight, and the coldest in Lincolnshire. You'll find the temperature rising during the night. The morning then, wet for Scotland, much of Wales and western England, probably brightening up in Northern Ireland, southwest of Wales and Cornwall. And the brighter weather trying to push eastwards as the rain tries to go eastwards, but there's no guarantee of these timings. The rain may well start to come back into Scotland, just for example. But in general, things try and move eastwards, and by evening, we've left with the rain in much of Scotland and the eastern side of England, but showers developing then in Wales and the West Country, probably heavy as well and possibly thundery. Double figures for everybody. Could call it mild as the wind eases in the south. I wouldn't necessarily on the eastern side of Scotland. On Wednesday, pressure is low but turning high, which means a few showers with brighter weather for the rest of the day, reasonably mild, and then strong westerlies on Thursday, good deal of cloud in the west.
Old habits die hard in the North Sea.
Deal me in.
You know they're running a poker school. Aye. And every bet's always the last.
You get caught again, Cinders. You're NRB. Not required back.
There'll be tears.
It's Heather.
She said, I love you. The stakes are high. Very high. Roughnecks, Thursday, 9:30, BBC One. All year round, people have been raising money for a very special charity. A charity that is the largest giver to children's groups in the UK. A charity where all the money donated goes to good causes. So the whole pound counts. The BBC's only charity, Children in Need. Raising money all year round, all over the country.
Now on BBC One, a specially extended edition of Panorama, in which Martin Bashir talks to the Princess of Wales.
1981, the wedding of the century. Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, the future King and Queen.